Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast. Today's episode, Stop the Bleed, and we are not talking about an injury. The U.S. workforce is currently experiencing what is being called the Great Resignation, a mass exodus of the workforce, if you will. During today's episode, we will discuss why this is happening and ways to stop the bleed at your organization. This can be the difference between success and failure for many companies. Merely the cost associated with hiring and onboarding can be astronomical. It's time to look at productive ways to retain employees so we don't bleed out as a collective workforce. Ron, give us background on when the Great Resignation started and what the driving forces were.
Yes, Kristin, I'm so glad we took this on. I get a lot of questions since I released my book, and this is one, employee retention, what's going on. And I hear a lot of excuses, but I hope we're going to be able to provide details that's going to help people retain their employees. Right. And when you see some of these stats, you're going to definitely want to do this. And for those of you, we've gotten some comments like, I wish my boss would listen to the podcast. Maybe recommend it.
Share it with them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Many people believe 2020 was the year that it began, but reports show 2022 was the real year, as about 50.5 million people quit their jobs, according to the federal JOLTS report. It's important to note that most people quit to take new jobs, not to leave the workforce altogether. And the fuel was ample job prospects. Here we go. Now listen to this. Higher wages and remote work opportunities. Yep. That's the two main reasons. Now, we also know through studies that maybe people aren't as loyal, and this, the Gen Z, millennials, as loyal to one company as maybe my dad worked for the same company pretty much his whole life. And we also know, Kristin, that studies show that a lot of people leave bosses and not the company. So those are two ancillary factors that we don't want to forget. But generally speaking, people are looking to make more money and they want that flexibility.
Right. And a lot of it is controllable, and we will dive into, there are aspects of the Great Resignation that are not in your control as the direct manager, but there's a lot that are. And so it's important to tune in and really pull those out of this. Now, in 2020, I do believe there were a shortage of people wanting to work, right? So we hear people saying, I know we have submissions from listeners that say, bosses are saying nobody wants to work. And I do believe that in 2020 and part of 2021, that was the case. And when you want to ask why, unemployment benefits were very generous. And in many cases, those on unemployment were bringing in more than their employed counterparts. So we had a confidential submission that came through, and they're basically saying that they had heard from someone that worked with them that during the pandemic, they did not want to go to work because they were making more to stay at home. So that just plays exactly into what I was talking about with unemployment benefits being higher than a lot of people's wages for actually going and working 40 plus hours. So fast forward to 2022, as Ron was saying, people are saying, and reports show that was the real year of the Great Resignation where it really kicked off. And in 2022, it's an accumulation of drivers. Why do people leave companies? Well, recent polling suggests that the number one reason is remote work, or at minimum, a hybrid work environment. In 2020, basically it proved that the archaic Monday through Friday chained to a desk working in a cube farm is completely unnecessary. And many people, like myself, have reevaluated priorities and passions. That was definitely the time to be doing that. So speaking specifically to company leaders out there, employees are leaving positions where they don't feel heard or valued. A survey by leaders.com showed that 45% of employees haven't been asked for their opinion in 12 plus months. And those that were asked didn't feel anything would come from their response. As we stated in the very first episode, and Ron just mentioned this, people leave bosses, not jobs.
That is so true. And 45% is unbelievable, number one. But if you're listening and you're in management, you've got to ask the opinion of people who are doing the job. Right. Everyone has blind spots. And that's one way to really seal up the cracks is talk to people. And if you build that rapport, they will usually give you true and honest feedback. Right. Another thing that managers need to do is they need to let it be known if they do take a suggestion by an employee. Let people know that. Celebrate that. It only serves to build that cohesive unit. So people want to be heard. That's a natural response. That's the way we're built. That's the way we're made up. I saw a company once where they actually were constantly doing these surveys, but the problem was they spent all this money doing the surveys, nothing changed, nothing whatsoever. Yeah. Employees are smart. They know that they are trying to check off some kind of box, or they're trying to look good to other executives or maybe another company, and yet nothing changes. We have to be listeners. We have to engage and find out what the employee needs. Now, Kristin, as you know, there's 100 dirty lessons in my book, and there was several that would be applicable to this conversation, but I'm going to use DL number 35, dirty lesson number 35. Employees don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right. When an employee is experiencing difficulties, a quality manager always considers his or her well-being. And if you've got your hand on the pulse, you're going to know when someone is discontent. You're going to know when they're unsatisfied. The problem is that lack of communication, that lack of active and empathetic listening and paying attention. Some simple steps, Kristin, would slow this process a lot. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm going to bring up one that I have a personal story and I have a submitter story. One way that you can retain is to offer competitive base salaries or an hourly wage. So when I was managing a department, I was hired to build out a new department and manage it, and that meant building an entire team. I was the only employee for a short period of time. I had to build an entire team. So fast forward, and as we're doing the functions for this department, it was quickly obvious that I needed a data analyst, someone that was their sole position. And so what ended up happening was I had employees at the time, and one of them was doing the daily functions that I hired him for, but then he was also filling that data analyst need. And he was doing very, very well. We needed to hire a data analyst, but instead it made a lot more sense to me to offer that position to him and then hire someone else to replace him. Of course, to do this, we were needing to actually give him the title that he was doing and pay him for the work that he was doing. When I approached my leadership about this, I was turned down and basically told that I needed to work with him on a 6-month to 12-month plan to be able to get him promoted. Well, that didn't go over well in his review, even though him and I had great rapport. He knew it was out of my control and he was seeking work elsewhere, and eventually was offered a position making exactly what a data analyst should make. Then guess what I had to do, Ron? I had to replace him with, drum roll, a data analyst making exactly what he wanted to make. So I had to tell someone who knew how to do the role, who was a stellar employee, I had to turn him down and turn him away and give him a piddly raise. And in place, I have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, hey, he's gone. Now I get to replace him. So it just made absolutely no sense. And it's things like that that really can tick you off when you're working in corporate America. And so that's one aspect of it. Ron, I'm curious what your thoughts on that are.
Oh, I'm so passionate about this topic, and I'm so frustrated. I had no idea, but when I wrote the book, I started getting all of these emails, people coming in asking questions. How do I handle a difficult boss? I'm never heard. I mean, it's over and over. And I said this before, but I cannot believe we're in 2023 with all the trainings, with all the online information, and you've still got bosses who do this. It's astounding. But
I know. It makes me want to curse, to be honest. I'm not going to. But that person, I have to go, I'm like, what is the gain for them? I think they're just that kind of mentality, they're so used to having minions that are just willing to work 30 years for them at a measly pay, right? I don't know. It's just, it's a different day and age, and that just doesn't work any longer. And that definitely showed. I want to cover the submitter story on the same topic. So we have an individual, and he was up for his 6-month review. Now, this is a standard review. It's a review/raise. So it's a common knowledge at this company that at 6 months they get the review and they generally get a raise. Well, at this 6-month review, they were told how amazing they were and just really a shining review. But then, unfortunately, were told that they were not going to offer a 6-month raise any longer to employees going forward. So at that point in time, naturally, this person is very frustrated. One, because that was what was told to them up front. So there's a complete breakdown in communication. The other piece is it's a breakdown in consistency, because especially in small offices, you have to ensure that you're being consistent across employees, especially when they're in the same role, the same job band, if you will. You have to be consistent with them. So everyone else that works with him has gotten their 6-month raise, and he did not. And it's not because he wasn't working up to snuff. He's doing amazing. His boss told him. It was because there was a lack of communication and he fell victim to poor leadership. How frustrating is that?
Oh my gosh. The proverbial rope, if you knew how many strands, how many cords that potentially can break, because that diminishes trust. Mm-hmm. It's going to affect culture. This person, of course, has got to save face with other employees, I'm sure. So
the peer aspect, absolutely.
Yeah, people talk. Come on, they know what kind of raise you get. And I just think, and I guarantee you, if that person leaves, they're going to be like, man, this person didn't want to work, or they didn't want to do the job. So I do hope managers are listening and they begin to realize that you can seal up the cracks with some effort. All right, I'm sorry.
No, seriously.
Okay, let's go into a category number 2 here, and that's let your employees work from home. Now, Chris and I are not naive. We realize there's small businesses. There's tons of positions. You cannot work from home. We get that.
Right.
But there are a lot of positions that people might be more effective, and it comes down to micromanaging instead of allowing for that flexibility. Listen to this. Right. According to Upwork's Future of Workplace Pulse Report, 36.2 million Americans will be working remotely in 2025, an increase of nearly 90% since before COVID-19. Remote work isn't just convenient to reduce the spread of disease at that time, this said, but has been shown to make employees happier and more productive at work. Now, if you look at all the technology, let's face it, a lot of jobs now involve technology, and that does kind of permit more flexibility to work from home.
Right.
So what do you think about that, Kristin?
Oh, I'm a huge advocate of remote work. And, if not fully remote, then at least have it to where they come in 1, 2, 3 days a week, right? So where you have that option. But I feel that, I worked remote for almost 3 years, fully remote, full time. Didn't go into the office for 3 years. And our department ran just fine. There weren't any concerns. I will say on this topic, though, as we found in the back office jobs, and at that time, my department was considered back office, not retail, right? The back office departments were all going to remote, a few hybrid, but the majority of the entire bank had made the decision to go remote. That same manager that I'm talking about had said, oh, no, my departments, I want them to go back full time, back to the office. And as you can imagine, that did not go over well. To me, there can be advantages to having folks like the hybrid aspect, I think that that's a great, even if it's just one day a week, I think that's a great time for the camaraderie, meetings, etc. But for no reason to say Monday through Friday is now what you're going to be doing again, when the world has changed. Everyone's proven that it can be done. So I think it's really, really important for those roles that can be done remote or hybrid. You need to listen to what the employee is telling you, and most of them want the flexibility.
Kristin, yeah, it's so true. And, there's an aspect of this that we have never discussed, and that is, especially in urban areas, traffic is unbelievable.
Yes.
So as part of my job, when I was a probation administrator, we led audits. They were called office reviews, but they were audits on U.S. probation offices across the country. I did one in San Francisco, and the average commute time was like an hour and 40 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't believe it. Can you imagine at that time? Now, a lot has changed since then, but that in and of itself would just destroy morale. So,
yes.
You save money, wear and tear on your vehicle and that traffic time. And I will be honest, I lived outside of Charleston, and it got to the point where I dreaded traffic way more than I did almost anything that I experienced on the job, especially the drive home. You're tired.
Yes.
And the traffic is so heavy. So there's so many wins there. Now, this is anecdotal. I talked to a lot of people who didn't mind, as you said, and this is number 3, provide a flexible schedule or reduced work days. And a lot of people do like the hybrid work environment. As you know, the world is very transient, and there's people that they do get a lot of their social interaction at work, and we understand that. So a lot of people do like that, just some flexibility. That really builds morale, I think.
Yeah.
Another one, Kristin, that I wanted to touch on, because this is in the leadership program and a lot of the things that I've done, is encourage and promote work-life balance. Or I have a friend who does training like I do. He calls it work-life harmony, because he says there's no way you can completely separate the two. They have to come together.
Right.
And as part of employee retention, you've got to take care of employees. You should, number one, try to be healthy and promote health. It's so easy to put out, some information about diet, exercise, promote it, but you've got to live that life. You can't be a slob. We used to have a manager who would literally spill food. It seemed like every day. I wondered if maybe he just dumped it on before he started eating.
Like on their shirt,
on
tie
the
or
shirt,
something?
almost every day. And it would be like a white shirt with spaghetti sauce or something.
Oh, my
I'm
goodness.
probably exaggerating every day, but it was a lot. It was a lot.
Often. Frequent.
You really wanted to go, hey, where's the spot? Like
you need a Tide stick.
You must have done really well. But promote these programs. Now, I do a program called Rethinking Wellness, and wellness has ended up becoming just another program. And that doesn't go well, because there was a high percentage of the employees didn't even know they had a wellness program. So it's got to be done on an individual basis, a mentorship, a middle supervisor encouraging health and well-being without being too intrusive, of course. But that does let people know you care about them if you're interested in their well-being. You also start to build that culture. Like, don't forget to hydrate this week. You can just throw out small things that lets people know you care about them.
Right. Absolutely.
Here's another one. This is number 5, recognize and reward your employees for their work. This has been proven to reduce employee turnover, generates more revenue, increases customer satisfaction, and that's another chord I talked about. They're going to treat the customer better.
Yes.
Improves employee engagement. They're going to be engaged. They're going to buy into the company mission, and creates a fun work culture. So as you reward people, I mentioned this once before, but it's worth mentioning again, that we had this award someone gave me for fun. It said, I'm kind of a big deal. And we gave that out weekly, and the employees got to choose. As long as, we didn't want people giving it to their best friend every week. But the employees got to choose, and it became this interesting dynamic, and people enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and I did a weekly update. We put a picture of the person that I'm kind of a big deal this week. And we also didn't allow the same person to get it like 2 times in a month.
Yes.
You have to put a little bit of boundaries, but oh my God, it was so much fun, and the employees just enjoyed it. It was a really cool thing to do.
Yes. Recognition is huge. I'll add that when I was 21, I managed a small telemarketing, like outbound calling center, and very tough job. But the cool part about it is I was able to recognize. So I put this program together myself. I literally cut out stars, and every day whoever had set the most appointments, because it was like an appointment type referral outbound calling center, whoever set the most that day would get their name on a star up on the wall. And it was like, they rotated in colors, yada, yada. Something so simple, but you don't even know. These like full grown men and women were so excited to get their name on the star. And then I also went to the Dollar Tree and just bought little tchotchkes or whatever, just, some treats or just whatnot. And they got a pick as well as getting their name on the star. And I couldn't believe that it was a pretty simple offering on my end. Of course, the budget was small back then, but they loved it. And it really did keep people in a job where there's very high turnover. It kept them there longer and it kept them happy. So it goes a long way. Despite what your job is, you could be a telemarketer and you could still be recognized and appreciated. So that was really nice.
So Kristin, I'm wondering, what could I do to get a star from you? I've been really working hard on this podcast.
I know. I'll just do it in the studio here. I'll just start putting stars. I guess we'd have to rotate, though, Ron. I'd have to figure out.
I've got something coming up for you here, but first I want to say this, and this is most unfortunate. 80% of American employees who were surveyed say they do not feel recognized or rewarded.
Yeah, it's bad.
Kristin, I'm gonna zip through a list. We'll go back and forth, but I want to remind everyone that a more comprehensive list will be in the show notes if you really are interested in some ideas. Of course, there's tons of stuff on the internet, but some of these are personal ideas that maybe Kristin and I have, been personally involved with. One is the 59-minute cards, and that is allowing an employee, and I allowed the supervisors to do this, but they would give someone a 59-minute card. Now, they did have, if they had teaching responsibilities, they certainly had to cover the calendar, the schedule, but they would let their supervisor know, hey, I want to use the card. They would turn it in, and that was just such a big hit. So, Kristin,
what is it? You get 59 minutes off?
Yeah. You leave.
Why not 60?
This was a policy that management could do 59 minutes.
Interesting.
Yes, if you own the company, give somebody half a day or a day off. That's
right,
cool.
right.
That's all I was allowed to do. But once I heard it in an executive staff meeting. Man, I got someone to help me. We made up these cards, like a deck of cards.
I love it.
And the supervisors could pass them out. And the funny thing is, one of the supervisors made one and put on the wall, and it had break in case of emergency. And I loved it. I walked in, I laughed and laughed. It was so cool. He had it blown up.
That's amazing. I love it. Before
great.
you go into your cards, though, Ron, I want to share one thing that I've done. And the reason I want to share it today is because, as you know, Ron, my 15-year-old dog, passed away last night. And the whole family's been devastated, and it reminded me of when I was managing a retail branch of a bank, and my banker at the time, his dog passed away, and he asked for time off or bereavement. And though we didn't have a specific category for pets, I was like, take a day paid, right? And I know not everyone has the autonomy to do that, but I did. And I would do that 10 times over again for people, because just watching my son and my daughter grieving our dog, it really is like a family member. And I think it's important for leaders especially, to take a step back and really try to feel what your employees are feeling, because, man, I'll tell you what, I was a wreck last night. I pulled it together this evening to record this, but it's a real thing. It's a real loss. And curious what your thoughts are on bereavement or time off for a pet passing.
Kristin, that one I had to evolve and grow into, because I've not had a pet recently, I'm saying. And this is a moment of vulnerability. I'm ashamed of it, but I did evolve and grow from it. But I had an employee who had lost a cat, took a day off, and another manager, when I asked where she was, they said she took a day off. Her cat passed away. And I didn't quite get that at first, and this middle manager said, you got to understand, this person's devastated. She had this cat for 12 years, and I started feeling more empathy or sympathy at least. And so when the person came back, I did ask about it. We chatted, and I learned a valuable lesson that day. I really did, and from then on, I was way more sympathetic. Now, of course, I didn't have the autonomy to do what you did, but sometimes, honestly, just hearing from your manager, someone, saying, hey, I'm really sorry, it goes such a long ways with employees.
Right. It absolutely does. And I appreciate you sharing that with us, because it is something that not everyone can put themselves in the shoes of the person grieving the loss of the pet. And so it does take growth. It's the same thing with, I've had managers that didn't have kids, or when I was a manager before I had kids, and you have employees who have their kids are sick, or there's appointments, and you approach it completely differently once you have been through it yourself. And it's just all about growth and experience.
Kristin, I'm going to touch on a few more. As I said, they'll be in the show notes. But if you have the autonomy, allow someone to work from home for a day. And that's a reward, especially if they have a job where they can't take advantage of telework or remote working.
Right.
Watch a movie at work. Kristin, I did this once. Now, I'm going to be honest, I did tie it into the work because we watched...
Lame.
We watched, but it was on Thurgood Marshall. And he was the first African-American Supreme Court Justice. His name was on our building, but it really was very well done. Lawrence Fishburne, I think, did it.
Nice.
And but I had no idea of the excitement that it generated. We had popcorn, and it was just a really cool thing. So sometimes you're not sure. Like, I wasn't sure that would work, but it really went well. It was fun. There was a lot of talking during the movie, but it was just fun.
I love that.
Now, you can be creative. If you could do this, pay for an escape room, kayaking. These things sometimes can be sold as team building, and they really are. I'm going to tell an interesting story. I transferred from one office to another, and there were two women that hadn't spoken. They were good friends. Something happened. Now, these are female federal agents. They hadn't spoken in months.
Wow.
So I talked to the executive, and I said, I think I might have the remedy. Now, to this day, no one knows what I did, and enough time has passed that I can tell the story. But I taught defensive tactics, and I would always rotate, because the worst thing that can happen to you when you teach defensive tactics is the two buddies, the two clowns, pair up, and they're gassing off, they're doing all these funny things. I've had it all happen. So I had this system so that you were only with a partner maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then you rotated.
Smart.
It also gives you different sizes, different body mechanics. I mean, there's a lot of positives to that.
Right.
But I strategically rotated until they were together. I went on for an hour, no rotation, no anything, and it was jiu-jitsu. It was called the mount. One person mounted the other, and you had to do a reversal and end up on top. Probably 10 minutes into this, I see them laughing a little bit. And ordinarily, I was somewhat strict. I mean, of course, between, activities, I'd let people laugh, but you had to watch for safety.
Right.
True story. By lunch, we were at a state police academy. We were borrowing their facilities. So we did a bag lunch, and everyone ate on picnic tables outside. Beautiful spring day. They ate together. And what I want to say about that is, I'm not saying you can have defensive tactics training, but it's the power of touch. And you got to be so careful with this, but just patting someone on the shoulder might be just the encouragement they need. Even if it's shaking hands and maybe putting your other hand on there and say, it's so good to have you back. You're expressing that empathy. But there's not a doubt in my mind, if I had not paired them up, I'm not sure they would have ever talked again. Right.
But it is powerful.
It worked.
That's amazing.
Just a few other things.
Yeah.
Again, I've said acknowledge accomplishments in a public way. Dress down on Fridays. I don't know if you had that, Kristin, but that became a huge hit with the government.
Oh, yes.
It was so cool to get the dress down, and then we had that person wore the blue jean shorts, and the judge took it away. But
I know. Someone always ruins it.
I digress.
Boobs hanging out, holes in the jeans.
Yeah, don't make sure you can't. Never mind. Let's move on.
Yeah, keep it covered.
Company swag is usually a big hit. Of course, it depends on your company, but people like swag. They really do. I remember when I hosted a national wellness conference, as soon as I pulled the team together, before we even did a schedule, we had speakers or anything, they go, what's a swag? What can we buy? That's what they wanted to know.
How funny.
There's wine tasting, gift cards, and Chris and I talked offline, but I was able to do 3 gift cards a year, and by George, I did it if people deserved it. Scavenger hunts, care packages. I'll tell you something cool about being in an academy, and this became a trend. When someone would come for the training, they're there for weeks and weeks. Their district, their home district, started sending care packages, and they would have all the different items and nuts and all these things. And it was such a morale builder. So when one executive did it, other people talked. The next thing we know, we had care packages coming in left and right, and I thought it was very cool. Some of these goes. Yeah, some of these goes without saying, but cash bonuses, stipends, those kind of things, and I know that depends on, whether or not you have the funds to do that.
I want to interject really quick on that. So there are actual studies out there that show people would choose being recognized publicly, then they would take that over a small cash bonus, or even like $100 cash bonus. People want to be recognized. So when you said cash bonuses, it just made me think. Now, it's not everybody, it's not across the board, but the majority of people want the public recognition, and that goes farther than the dollars sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's true. So one more quick small story. I didn't do this enough, so if you're listening and you work for me, don't think I'm exaggerating, but I wrote personal notes on cards. And I gave a couple of newer employees the cards, welcome aboard, you're doing great, da-da-da-da-da. So at the time, these 2 people, we had half our staff was on detail, so you could stay fresh. So in other words, all over the United States, people would come do a 3-year detail. I mean, we had to select them, they had to have the skill set, but they would come and work for 3 years, then they go back to their home district. 2 employees walked into me 3 years later, both of them had their cards. And they said, you have no idea how much this meant to us. And I was like, wow. Then I started going, I should have written more cards. But anyway, a handwritten note, especially if you can still write cursive, that way they can't read it.
Right.
Just kidding.
Yeah, that does go far. And that reminded me of Jason McCleskey, my manager. I've called him out a few times on here, recognizing him. And he also, so I wasn't the only one he sent one to. He sent them to his entire managerial team. But he sent them, he could have interofficed them, but instead he sent them to our personal addresses. And for some reason, I bet there's science behind it. It was even more personal because he sent it to our homes. And it was a recognition card just thanking us for whatever, he personalized it per person. But that went so far. And I have a smile file. Someone once told me to keep a smile file. Basically, all of my recognition awards, like notes like that, I've kept them over the years, and I still have that to this day, and that was over 10 years ago.
That's great. I got that card that I got once. It's in my file.
That's awesome.
Thanks a lot,
You have a smile
Kristin.
file, too.
Kristin, talk to us about maternity leave, paternity leave. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's incredibly important. So different companies do it different ways. I know that when I worked somewhere, when I worked for the bank, I was given 3 months off, and that was pretty standardized. Now that same company gives 4 months off, and now there's paternity leave as well. So it's very different. But I think it's critical. Now, understanding, I've worked for large corporations where they had it standardized. It's going to be a little bit different when it comes to a smaller, either just like a mon pa or just a smaller company. That's going to be different. You're not always going to get as much time off, but it is critical that employers see how crucial it is that mothers are given this option, and that they are still shown the value, understanding they're going to be gone, because there's a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of anxiety, even though my job was protected. I felt so nervous. I don't know, for some reason I felt like I was going to be gone for 90 days and my job wasn't going to be there, or they were going to see that they could do it without me, or I had anxiety over leaving. It was my first pregnancy. After the second one, I'm like, whatever. But I think it's important for employers to ensure that their employees that are going to go out on leave feel that they are supported, and that everything's going to be handled while they're gone, so that they don't have to worry or think about work while they should be tending to their newborn.
Kristin, I think that's a positive trend that's happening, the paternity, and believe me, maternity is so important, but paternity is not only a father spending time with the child, but also being there for the mother of the child. And I spoke to a couple, and that was her comment. Of course, she wanted, her child to bond with its father, but she was so grateful because, there's a delicate time there. You don't feel like doing a lot of things. And so I do think that's a positive trend that, especially larger corporations are certainly understanding that.
Ron, I cried when my husband went back to work because I was scared SH-less to do it on my own overnight. I was literally like, don't go, call out. He didn't get much time off. He got maybe 2 weeks with the police department. But so I think it's incredible for the mom to be supported. And I do love that more companies are doing that.
Kristin, just quickly, I'm going to zip through some of these a little quicker, but I have a story on that. There was no such thing as paternity leave. When my youngest daughter was born, some people call it colic. It was never diagnosed, but she cried for 3 months. I'm a light sleeper. I was trying to alternate feedings and so forth. I was so mentally fatigued, and I was a U.S. probation officer. I'm dealing with a lot of issues, serving the federal judges, writing these reports, dealing with offenders, defendants. And I mean, there were days that it wasn't even safe to drive to work, but I had to go to work. So that's when I began to change a little bit because, oh my goodness, I could have used that time. But the problem is in my world, and I'm sure a lot of people will be shaking their head, that if you take off, your work's going to build up. There's no one else can do it. You're in a specialized field. So I think employers have to lay the groundwork if they do plan to do that so that they can have backup. And many small businesses, I get it, but do as much as you can is, I guess, what we would say.
Absolutely.
And
that's all about retention, too. You want to keep people on board.
You do. You
need to.
I've got one more because it's a long list. And people can review the show notes if they want to look at them. But what do you think? I saw one on the list. Bring your pet to work.
Oh my gosh, they totally did that at my office before. People loved that. There's a little risk in it. You have to make sure that they're trained, aren't going to take dumps everywhere and bite the other employees. But people loved it. Just think about it. They bring them to hospitals, right? They bring them in, children's ward, elderly. It boosts everyone's spirit. Does it in the workplace too.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Did you have a bad experience with it, Ron?
No. I'm ashamed to say this. I turned it down. I was approached for that. Yeah, but I'm going to make excuses, but I was on the campus of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, so I was going to have to push the boundaries to do it, and it just became too complicated. It's just one of those things. Anyway.
It's a hill you didn't wish to die on. I think that's understandable. There's going to be things we have to say no to, right?
Yeah.
And that happens.
We had competitions with other agencies, and that was super cool, and people got really motivated with that. Of course, a lot of my staff was firearms and defensive tactics instructors, so they're pretty competitive anyway.
Yeah.
We went up against the Coast Guard, Border Patrol, and others, and
awesome.
that was cool. Number 6, create a culture that employees want to be a part of. We've already talked about a lot of strategies, but let me give you another stat here. A 2019 Glassdoor study found that a company's culture matters significantly, not only to the employees who are considering a job, but actually, listen to this, 77% said that they consider a company's culture before working there. 77%. Yeah. So if you've got a bad reputation, you have to work on rebranding and do it as quickly as you can because that's going to really hurt. But a lot of that, Kristin, you've talked about the power of a smile, the empathy, getting to know your employees. All of these serve to create a positive work culture.
Right,
People need to
right.
feel heard. They need to feel appreciated. And you can turn it around. You can turn it around.
Right, absolutely. I'll share number 7 here, build employee engagement. And that is one of the most important strategies for employee retention, is to build up your workers' engagement within your own organization. I used to say we want to keep them in the house, right? We want to keep them engaged and in the house. A disengaged employee may have lower morale, cause losses in productivity, and generally bring down your company, right? It's like when you have that cancer, that person, and even if maybe it's the leader's fault, that's really poor leadership has led them to become this cancer. Regardless, you need to fix it, because it will spread and it will bring down your company. Make sure to give your employees a voice by making them feel listened to and showing them that their opinions matter. Do something like a public show of implementation. So I know that when we used to have our weekly team meetings that, of course, I'm hosting, so I'm the leader, we would take ideas from Roundtable and we would implement the very next day. And I know that that's not everyone's speed, but I'm like a bull with, scraping my foot on the ground. I like to get going when a new idea comes up, and we would implement it right away. Now, obviously we all had to agree on this, but the whole point is ensuring that if your employees are taking the time to give you feedback and provide ideas, you need to implement. And even if you have to go and revise, maybe it didn't work out, regardless, you've implemented it and they now feel empowered and fired up to do it again.
No, that's great. And that goes into the next one, number 8, emphasis on teamwork. People have to feel like a team. And Kristin, the funniest story, I played 1 year of college basketball. I ended up going to a school in Kentucky, and I was the only player on the team from Virginia. I grew up in Virginia, and it was really, there was a lot of nepotism. There were locals, the local Kentucky schools, they definitely were favored. So I had to work twice as hard for everything.
Yeah,
well, when it was time
imagine.
to give out the uniforms, this is so embarrassing. They only had an extra large left. I got the last jersey. I weighed probably 160, 165 pounds in a
nice.
extra large jersey. I've got this friend who went with me. His name is Bob Altizer. I literally wrote I devoted a chapter of my book to him. He literally, I'm wearing this jersey. He would be like, float up and shoot one, Ron. And
Your nipples are hanging out.
Yeah, and when I was on the bench, he got these posters that said, put Ward in, and he had a chant going. And the coach came to me, pointed his finger, and he says, don't you ever try to manipulate me to get play time. I wanted to kill Bob.
Oh,
he
my
hurt
gosh.
me way worse than he helped me.
Yeah.
But I digress.
He was a good friend, it sounds like.
Oh, we're still great friends to this day.
That's amazing. All right, Ron, I think you should bring us home with burnout, all things burnout, because that's your forte.
It is, and I talk about this a lot in my wellness programs. But let me give another statistic here. 2020 Gallup report says 76% of employees sometimes experience burnout on the job, and 28% said they feel burnout often or always. Mm-hmm. Burnout is something, this is what I recommend that companies do, and it's proven very beneficial. Most people know stats. Most people understand burnout. A lot of people don't really know when they're getting to that threshold of being completely burned out. But what I do is I encourage companies, and so many have done this, to establish wellness partners. And that wellness partner is there to encourage you when you need it. And it's really good if you can do some cross-training and some people can absorb the work. One of the questions I always ask is, do you go on vacation or do you go on vacation? And Kristin, I told you this before. I can remember working on vacations, working on reports, because the work would just be piling up.
Right.
Managers, employers, executives, please listen. Find ways to give your employees a lengthy mental break from work. They
Yes.
need that. They're going to be way more motivated, replenished,
Yes.
and not burned out, and they're going to be
Cut
more
off their
productive.
access. I mean, literally, that's had to happen before. I'm going to cut you off for 2 weeks.
It's so funny you said that, Kristin. I had someone told me their company cuts off their access. You
Yes.
have an emergency phone number that you can call if it has to be an emergency, but they cut off everything.
Yeah,
They
ours did
suspend the
too.
emails. That is
Yeah.
so awesome to me.
It is.
And I never really got that. So at some point, I'm going to need you to give me a vacation, Kristin.
Yeah, all right. Sounds like a plan. Oh, Ron, this has been awesome.
It has.
I know we have so much more, but we're
my
going to
God.
provide it in the show notes. So I think takeaways, we should really jump to takeaways. And if you want to kick us off, Ron, I'll definitely plug in what I think are the main takeaways for, or should be the main takeaways for employers and leaders in general.
You know, I think the takeaway that I would get would be, or that I would convey, would be pay attention to your employees.
Yeah.
Don't use the excuse, nobody wants to work. Maybe you can coach them
Yeah.
into being a productive employee. Coaching is so important. Help them get buy-in, teach them what they need to, give them positive feedback. And Chris and I both get, and we will probably even go into sometime when you have to terminate, provide corrective feedback. We realize that you can't implement every idea. You can't just, pat someone on the back when they're not doing a job. We get all of that. But if you're having turnover, and look at another company, and if it's similar and you've got more turnover than they do, or you're losing to a competitor or other types of occupations, you really need to do an internal study. You need to
Right.
look into how people are being treated, how your middle managers are treating people, and maybe survey people. And you don't have to make it so controversial. The problem with
Right.
some surveys is they just open the door, then people just vomit all their complaints out on the survey. That doesn't work. Maybe you just
Right.
have individual meetings, or you have 3 or 4 questions. What can we do to improve? Things like that. But we've got to pay attention, and we've got to take this seriously if you want to retain your employees.
Right, right. And I think something that really helped me was think of ways that you can say yes. Obviously, we need to be, we're on, planet Earth here, so we can't say yes to everything. But a lot of managers, I have found that their knee jerk is to say no. And I don't necessarily know why I didn't do that, but it could be a protective instinct, could be control. But try to approach it with a yes, and then tell yourself why the yes might not work out, if that makes sense. You want to do what you can to keep your employees happy within reason. But I feel, and even just from you and I talking, Ron, there's a lot of autonomy out there that managers are not taking advantage of. Reward programs, time off programs. It's like you need to take full advantage of everything you have to offer. And if you have your own company, then you need to develop something like that if it's not already in place, because that goes so far and you will keep people working for you for a long time. And again, I always say I feel like, at least in my experience, there's been 2 types of people. I've had my worker bees, and I've had the folks that I'm training to be the next me. You need both. Not everyone is going to be the next you. You really want to focus on understanding. You've got a lot of worker bees that don't want to be leaders.
That's right.
That work under you, and they are very happy doing the work, but you need to treat them right, and you need to really see their value and let them know that you see their value, and they will work for you for a long time if you recognize that.
Absolutely. Chris and I know we've had a lot of people that will be listening to this episode shaking their heads, but we do want to encourage you.
Shake them.
Yeah, shake them. But we want to encourage you. I would love to see every manager in the United States listen to this episode. I don't know how you could not get some ideas and maybe just be reminded. Maybe you're a manager and you're burned out. Get the help you need so that you can be there for your employees. It's so important to keep yourself healthy.
Right.
Kristin, you know what I'm going to ask you?
How do people find us?
Wow.
Yes,
You're
we've got
amazing.
it down. We've got it down. So you can find us anywhere you get your podcast. The podcast is free to listen to. We want you to subscribe and rate the podcast. We want you to share it with family, friends, neighbors, coworkers, your boss. We also want you to interact with us on social media. We are on Facebook. We have a Facebook group that is private that we would love for you to be a part of. You can share ideas and stories. You can submit anonymously also, which is a great feature there. We have our Instagram page. We also have a LinkedIn group specific to the podcast as well. So pretty much anywhere you use social media, you can find us there. And you can also visit our website. Ron, can you share the Forward Operations?
Yes, it's forwardoperations.com. We are expanding the company. Cool announcements are coming, and we're just really excited. And Chris and I would love to conduct training, executive coaching, whatever your needs are. We're here to help.
Right, exactly. Absolutely. So you know where to find us now. Now, turn it into action and do it.
That's right.
And help us out. We appreciate you very much.
Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.